Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. So in today's video we will see a bit on brushes. Alright, so if we see everything that is visible on our screen is visible because it was painted by a brush. Alright, now a brush is used to paint an inside area of any UI element or shapes. So there are many kind of brushes available in WPF. So one of the most prominent one is, of course, and mostly used is the solid color brush. Apart from solid color brush, we also have brushes that has this capability to print patterns. It could be image patterns, it could be geometric patterns, and it even can paint using VisualBrush that paints the visual elements of WPF objects which are derived from framework element, right? So let's see each one of them with an example. Alright, so let's start with this solid color brush, and before that let's quickly go through the setup that I have here. So here I have a grid. On that grid I have one canvas. The background of that canvas has been painted with a checkered rectangle and checkered square box so that we can clearly understand which all area has been painted transparently and which all areas are opaque, right? Now on top of that canvas we have also placed a grid, and inside that grid if we draw any element or shape for that matter, then it gets overlaid and we can clearly see the effect. Alright, now with all that said, let's draw an ellipse element here, and let's specify the width as 400 and then height as 300. Alright, we will fill this ellipse with various type of brushes. Right? So to start with, we will define a solid color brush. Let's define the color as red, and then we define the opacity as 0.5. Alright, so here is the output. So it has painted the inside region of this ellipse with red color with semi-transparent background. Right? Now opacity means it's a in 0 to 1 scale, the value that we specify here defines the relative transparency of that brush. So 0 means it's completely transparent and 1 means it's completely opaque. Anything in between changes the transparency level. Alright, now let's see a relatively more complex brush. So that's your linear gradient brush. Now we can specify various colors of that gradient using this gradient stop. Let's specify red, and then let's specify offset as 0.3, and let's repeat this. Change the second color as yellow, and then we change the offset as 0.7. So offset is again in a relative way. From in a scale of 0 to 1, it specifies the area where the intensity of the color is maximum. To further elaborate my point, when we specify the offset as 0.3, that means from the left edge of that region at 30% distant area, the intensity of red color would be maximum. Similarly, from the left at 70% distant region, the intensity of the yellow would be maximum. Now here let's specify the start point as 0, 0 and then end point as 0, 1. It changes this gradient as a vertical gradient. Now if we change this to 1, 0, then it changes this to a horizontal gradient. So if you have already understood that start point 0, 0 means the starting point of this gradient. Now if you specify, now if you can follow my mouse here, now if we specify the end point as 1, 1, that means in a scale of 0 to 1, this is where I want the gradient to end. If I specify the endpoint as 1 1. Since I have specified the endpoint as 1 0, that means the gradient has started from here and it has ended here. That means it's a horizontal gradient. Alright, now that's all about linear gradient brush. Now we have very interesting gradient. The next one is your radial gradient brush, and it has lots of effect if used properly. As in linear gradient brush, here also we specify the different colors using gradient stock. Let's say we are specifying the gradient to go from red to yellow. Alright. Alright, now here we have the gradient drawn as a radial gradient. That means it has started plotting the colors inside out. Okay. A very interesting property is gradient origin. Now, by default, the origin would be 0.5, 0.5. That means the gradient's color composition would be the core of that first color would be at a space of relative distance as 0.5, 0.5. Alright, so to further elaborate on that one, let's change this gradient origin to 0.3 to 0.5. Now if you see here, the composition of the colors has shifted left. If I make this 0.3, then the composition of the gradient has started forming from the top. That means this composition of color is getting changed. That means the first color is changing its location. Alright, and similarly we have another property, that's your center property. If I specify, by default it is also 0.5, 0.5. If I change the property as 0.3, 0.5, that means the location of this gradient is actually changing. If you see here, the quality of gradient has not changed, the color combination of this gradient has not changed, but the location of this gradient is actually changing. And if we make it 0.3, 0.7, then it changes the gradient's location. The bounding rectangle is actually changing. Now similarly, if we specify the radius x, it's the major axis of the radial gradient. So if we specify here 0.7, it gets spreads out horizontally, and if we specify radius y as 0.3, it gets let's specify 0.7, then it gets spread vertically. Alright, so if we change the radius y lower than 0.5, then it gets inverted. Right, so that's all about it. And then one more interesting property is spread method. Now if we specify spread method as pad, which is the default one, that means when the gradient painting has ended, the rest of the area would be filled by the second color. If we change it to reflect, then when the gradient painting has changed, it would start painting from the second color and continue, and then it would paint the gradient in a reverse way. Alright, 0.3, you can see the effect. We can change the radius. Alright, now 5 and 6. Now if you see here, the spread method, since it is reflect, it has altered the radial gradient painting. Alright, so that's all about radial gradient brush. Now let's move on to use a drawing brush. As you might have guessed, a drawing has to be supplied in order for drawing brush to paint that region. So a drawing brush paints the inside region of this ellipse, in our example ellipse, with the drawing that we are going to supply it. So let's give it a drawing. Uh, let's give it a geometry drawing. Alright, now let's define a geometry. Let's define a elliptical geometry. Say center is 20 20, and then radius x is 50, and then radius y is 30. Alright. However, even though we have specified the geometry, we have not specified the brush for this drawing. Alright. And the drawing has to be supplied with a brush. Alright. Here we go. So here we have defined elliptical geometry, and with that geometry we have created a drawing using red brush, and with that drawing we have created a drawing brush, and with that drawing brush we have filled the ellipse, right? So that is what it is. Now to make things more interesting, let's use image drawing. Now we can specify an image, and then rectangle as 0 0, 100. So here we have defined one drawing using this image, and using that drawing we have created this drawing brush which is used to fill this ellipse, right? Alright, now to make things interesting, we can define a drawing group, and inside that drawing group you can use this image drawing as well as geometry drawing. Let's try that. Let's use a drawing group. Within this drawing group we'll move this, right? Now inside this we will also create one geometry drawing. We will specify the geometry as let's say we use ellipse geometry. Center 20 20, and then radius x as 30, and then radius y is 20. Alright. Let's make this 20 20. However, this is not changing anything. That's because we have not changed the viewport, and the fill tile mode as tile. Let's use the viewport units as absolute. Let's use the viewport as 20 20. It's too small. Let's make this 100 100. Alright. Let's make this ellipse a bit more elaborate. Alright, so we cannot specify the transparency opacity here. We can only specify the opacity as this brush level. So as you can see here, this is not quite a masterpiece, but somehow it shows what we can do with this drawing brush. Okay, so using this drawing brush we can overlay multiple type of drawings. As you can see here, one of the drawing is geometry drawing and the second drawing is image drawing, right? So that's about it. Alright, let's move on. Let's use image brush. Alright, we have already seen the image brush, right? Now let's see one VisualBrush. Now if we can define here, we can define the visual of this VisualBrush. So this visual can be any UI element that we can think of. Let's use a stack panel, and within this stack panel let's use a text block with text as hello, and then font size as 16. Alright, so let's rebuild the project. Yeah, so after rebuilding the project, you can see here that we have used this text block visual and use this to paint this ellipse. Right, so this is quite significant if you are drawing an application. If you are drawing on an application's surface to magnify things or give nice effects like reflection and uh, stretchings, so in those, if you want to show those things, so this VisualBrush comes very handy. Alright, so in today's video, that's all that I had. There are many, these are the various kind of brushes that we can use in WPF, and by combining these brushes we can have very nice effect. Alright, so for today's video that was it. Hope you have liked this video, and if you have liked, then please do subscribe to my channel. Alright, thanks a lot for watching. Bye.